My name is Margaret Ellison, though most folks around Stowe, Vermont just call me Maggie. I'm 83 years old today, and I'm sitting here at my kitchen table, staring at a birthday cake I bought for myself at Shaw's General Store. It's got one lonely candle on it, and Lord knows that little flame feels like the only light in this old farmhouse these days. People think being forgotten happens all at once, but that's not true. It happens slowly, like the way paint peels off these old clapboard houses here in Vermont. First you notice a small chip, then a few more, and before you know it, whole sections are bare and weathered. That's what happened with my children. One missed phone call, one forgotten birthday, one dismissive comment at a time. I raised 3 children in this house after my James died 30 years ago. Angela, Carl, and Lydia. Beautiful babies. All of them. Smart as whips and full of dreams. I used to sit right here at this same table, helping Angela with her college applications, teaching Carl how to balance a checkbook, braiding Lydia's hair for school pictures. This kitchen was the heart of our family then. James died on a Tuesday in March 1994. Heart attack, sudden as a thunderclap. One minute he was laughing at something on the evening news. The next minute he was gone. The children were young then. Angela just starting college, Carl in high school, Lydia still in middle school. I had to make a choice, fall apart, or hold everything together. I chose to hold it together. Lord, the things I did to keep this family afloat. I taught literature at Stowe High School during the day, Shakespeare and Steinbeck to teenagers who thought reading was punishment. By night, I kept books for 3 different businesses in town: Murphy's Hardware, the Riverside Inn, and Dr. Patterson's dental practice. Numbers dancing in front of my tired eyes until 2 in the morning, but those extra dollars meant Angela could stay at UVM, meant Carl could play hockey with equipment that wasn't second-hand, meant Lydia could go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. On weekends, I cleaned houses, big fancy places up on the mountain where rich folks from New York came to ski. I scrubbed their toilets and washed their dishes and folded their expensive clothes, swallowing my pride with every toilet brush, because my children's futures mattered more than my dignity. But here's what they don't know, what they never bothered to ask about. I was smart with that money. Every extra dollar I could squeeze from those 3 jobs went into real estate. Started small, a little rental property on Cottage Street that needed work. Fixed it up myself, learned to use power tools, watching YouTube videos at the library. 1 property became 2, then 3, then 4. Each one carefully chosen, each one adding to a nest egg my children assumed didn't exist. They see this old farmhouse with its creaky floors and faded wallpaper and think their mother is poor. They see my second-hand dresses and my 15-year-old Subaru and shake their heads at what they call my circumstances. What they don't see is the careful financial planning of a woman who learnt to make every penny count. Angela calls maybe once a month now, usually when she's stuck in traffic in Boston and has nothing better to do. She's some kind of executive at a consulting firm, making more money in a year than I ever dreamed of, but she talks to me like I'm simple. "How are you managing, Mum?" she asks, in that tone people use with small children or folks they think are losing their minds. She never asks about my health, my thoughts, my feelings, just whether I'm managing. Carl lives right here in Vermont, just 20 miles away in Waterbury, but he might as well be on the moon for all I see of him. He sells real estate now. Ironic, considering he has no idea his mother owns 4 rental properties that bring in more monthly income than his best sales months. He calls when he needs something, usually money for his kids or some crisis his wife Linda can't handle, but a visit just to see his mother. That's asking too much. And Lydia, my baby girl, married to money and living in that big house in Shelburne, playing at being a socialite. She's embarrassed by me. I can see it in her eyes when she has to introduce me to her fancy friends. "This is my mother," she says, like she's apologizing for something broken that she can't fix. The loneliness is the hardest part, not the physical aloneness. I've got Jocelyn, my nurse, who comes twice a week and actually listens when I talk. It's the emotional loneliness of loving people who don't love you back, at least not enough to show it. It's knowing that the 3 people you sacrificed everything for see you as nothing more than an obligation, a burden they're waiting to be free of. But tonight, something's different. Tonight, As I blow out this single candle on my store-bought cake, I hear voices drifting from Carl's real estate office down on Main Street. The windows are open, and sound carries funny in these old Vermont towns. I hear Carl's voice, and what he's saying to his wife Linda makes my blood run cold. "She'll be gone soon," he says, casual as commenting on the weather. "All that land's worth a fortune, prime development potential." I set down my coffee cup with hands that are suddenly shaking. 30 years I've been invisible to my children. 30 years they've seen me as irrelevant, worthless, a remnant of a simpler time they've outgrown. What they don't know is that this remnant has been listening. This old woman they dismiss has been watching, and this forgotten matriarch is about to remind them that quiet doesn't mean weak, and invisible doesn't mean powerless. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight, I'm just an 83-year-old woman making a wish on a birthday candle, and what I'm wishing for might surprise them all. My name is Margaret Ellison, though most folks around Stowe, Vermont, just call me Maggie. I'm 83 years old today, and I'm sitting here at my kitchen table staring at a birthday cake I bought for myself at Shaw's General Store. It's got one lonely candle on it, and Lord knows that little flame feels like the only light in this old farmhouse these days. People think being forgotten happens all at once, but that's not true. It happens slowly, like the way paint peels off these old clapboard houses here in Vermont. First you notice a small chip, then a few more, and before you know it, whole sections are bare and weathered. That's what happened with my children. One missed phone call, one forgotten birthday, one dismissive comment at a time. I raised 3 children in this house after my James died 30 years ago. Angela, Carl, and Lydia, beautiful babies. All of them, smart as whips, and full of dreams. I used to sit right here at this same table, helping Angela with her college applications, teaching Carl how to balance a checkbook, braiding Lydia's hair for school pictures. This kitchen was the heart of our family then. James died on a Tuesday in March 1994. Heart attack, sudden as a thunderclap. One minute he was laughing at something on the evening news. The next minute he was gone. The children were young then. Angela just starting college, Carl in high school, Lydia still in middle school. I had to make a choice, fall apart, or hold everything together. I chose to hold it together. Lord, the things I did to keep this family afloat. I taught literature at Stowe High School during the day, Shakespeare and Steinbeck to teenagers who thought reading was punishment. By night I kept books for 3 different businesses in town: Murphy's Hardware, the Riverside Inn, and Dr. Patterson's dental practice. Numbers dancing in front of my tired eyes until 2 in the morning, but those extra dollars meant Angela could stay at UVM, meant Carl could play hockey with equipment that wasn't second-hand, meant Lydia could go on that school trip to Washington, D.C. On weekends I cleaned houses, big fancy places up on the mountain where rich folks from New York came to ski. I scrubbed their toilets and washed their dishes and folded their expensive clothes, swallowing my pride with every toilet brush, because my children's futures mattered more than my dignity. But here's what they don't know, what they never bothered to ask about. I was smart with that money. Every extra dollar I could squeeze from those 3 jobs went into real estate. Started small, a little rental property on Cottage Street that needed work. Fixed it up myself. Learned to use power tools watching YouTube videos at the library. 1 property became 2, then 3, then 4. Each one carefully chosen, each one adding to a nest egg my children assumed didn't exist. They see this old farmhouse with its creaky floors and faded wallpaper and think their mother is poor. They see my second-hand dresses and my 15-year-old Subaru and shake their heads at what they call my circumstances. What they don't see is the careful financial planning of a woman who learned to make every penny count. Angela calls maybe once a month now, usually when she's stuck in traffic in Boston and has nothing better to do. She's some kind of executive at a consulting firm, making more money in a year than I ever dreamed of, but she talks to me like I'm simple. "How are you managing, Mom?" she asks, in that tone people use with small children or folks they think are losing their minds. She never asks about my health, my thoughts, my feelings, just whether I'm managing. Carl lives right here in Vermont, just 20 miles away in Waterbury, but he might as well be on the moon for all I see of him. He sells real estate now. Ironic, considering he has no idea his mother owns 4 rental properties that bring in more monthly income than his best sales months. He calls when he needs something, usually money for his kids or some crisis his wife Linda can't handle, but a visit just to see his mother, that's asking too much. And Lydia, my baby girl, married to money and living in that big house in Shelburne, playing at being a socialite. She's embarrassed by me. I can see it in her eyes when she has to introduce me to her fancy friends. "This is my mother," she says, like she's apologizing for something broken that she can't fix. The loneliness is the hardest part. Not the physical aloneness. I've got Jocelyn, my nurse, who comes twice a week and actually listens when I talk. It's the emotional loneliness of loving people who don't love you back, at least not enough to show it. It's knowing that the 3 people you sacrificed everything for see you as nothing more than an obligation, a burden they're waiting to be free of. But tonight something's different. Tonight, as I blow out this single candle on my store-bought cake, I hear voices drifting from Carl's real estate office down on Main Street. The windows are open, and sound carries funny in these old Vermont towns. I hear Carl's voice, and what he's saying to his wife Linda makes my blood run cold. "She'll be gone soon," he says, casual as commenting on the weather. "All that land's worth a fortune. Prime development potential." I set down my coffee cup with hands that are suddenly shaking. 30 years I've been invisible to my children. 30 years they've seen me as irrelevant, worthless, a remnant of a simpler time they've outgrown. What they don't know is that this remnant has been listening. This old woman they dismiss has been watching, and this forgotten matriarch is about to remind them that quiet doesn't mean weak, and invisible doesn't mean powerless. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight I'm just an 83-year-old woman making a wish on a birthday candle, and what I'm wishing for might surprise them all. 3 days after my lonely birthday, I'm in my garden picking the last tomatoes of the season, when the world starts spinning. Not the gentle dizziness you get from standing up too fast, but the kind that makes you grab for anything solid and pray you don't hit the ground hard. I do hit the ground right there between the tomato plants. James helped me stake 30 years ago, and the herb garden, where I still grow the basil for Lydia's favorite pasta sauce. Not that she's eaten my cooking in 5 years. Mrs. Henderson from next door must have heard me fall, because the next thing I know, there are paramedics in my garden, young faces full of professional concern, asking me questions about my medications and whether I've been eating properly. Have I been eating properly? What a question. I've been feeding other people properly for 60 years. I suppose I forgot to worry about myself somewhere along the way. The ambulance ride to Fletcher Allen Hospital feels like a journey through time. As these kind young people check my pulse and blood pressure, I remember other emergency room visits when my children were small. Angela's broken arm from falling out of the apple tree behind the house. Carl's concussion from that hockey accident when he was 15. Lydia's appendicitis scare when she was 12, and I was so terrified I might lose her. Back then, I was the one holding their hands, whispering reassurances, promising everything would be okay. I wonder if any of them will hold my hand tonight. They do come to the hospital, all 3 of them, but not for the reasons a mother hopes for. Within 2 hours of the phone call from the hospital, Angela has driven up from Boston, Carl has come from his office in Waterbury, and Lydia has arrived from her house in Shelburne. But they don't come alone, and that tells me everything I need to know about their priorities. Angela brings her leather briefcase, and her lawyer, a sharp-eyed young woman named Christine, who looks at me like I'm a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be comforted. Carl brings real estate documents. I can see the Century 21 letterhead peeking out of his folder. And Lydia brings an attitude that could freeze Lake Champlain in July. They pull chairs around my hospital bed like they're setting up for a business meeting, not visiting their mother, who just collapsed in her garden. The fluorescent lights above us hum with the same cold efficiency I hear in their voices as they start talking about my situation. "Mum," Angela begins, and already I can hear the corporate condescension she uses on employees she's about to fire. "We've been talking, and we think it's time to be practical about your living arrangements." Practical. There's that word again. The same word they used when they convinced me to stop traveling after James died. The same word they used when they told me I was too old to keep teaching. The same word that seems to strip away every choice I might want to make about my own life. Carl slides papers across the hospital bed table like he's closing a deal. We've had these documents prepared by Angela's firm, early asset transition papers, power of attorney arrangements, that sort of thing. It'll make everything easier for everyone involved. Everyone involved. I wonder if that includes me, or if I'm just an obstacle to their convenience. But it's Lydia who delivers the killing blow, looking at me with eyes that hold no warmth, no recognition of the woman who stayed up all night when she had pneumonia, who taught her to drive, who paid for her wedding dress when she was too proud to admit her husband-to-be's family had cut them off financially. Honestly, Mum, she says, examining her manicured nails like they're more interesting than her mother's medical crisis, this whole charade of independence is exhausting for all of us. Why didn't you just leave us something useful instead of pretending you can manage on your own? The room falls quiet, except for the beeping of my heart monitor, which I notice is beeping faster now. My children, these 3 people I gave birth to, raised, sacrificed for, loved unconditionally, are sitting around my hospital bed, talking about me like I'm already dead. Worse, they're talking about me like my death will be an inconvenience they need to manage efficiently. They speak about my mind as if it's already gone, about my judgment as if it never existed, about my worth as if it were measured only by what I can leave them. And the cruelest part is that they clearly believe they're being kind, that reducing me to a set of assets to be managed is somehow a merciful way to treat the woman who shaped their entire lives. What they don't notice, what they've never noticed, is that Jocelyn, my nurse, has quietly entered the room during their family meeting and is witnessing this entire exchange. Jocelyn, who has worked with elderly patients for 15 years, who has seen every kind of family dynamic, is standing by my IV pole with an expression of horror that my own children don't bother to see. I look at each of their faces, searching for some shadow of the children I used to know. Angela, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them sunshine flowers. Carl, who wrote me poems for Mother's Day in his careful 3rd-grade handwriting. Lydia, who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and tell me I made her feel safe. Those children are gone, replaced by adults who see me as nothing more than an impediment to their inheritance, a problem requiring legal solutions, an embarrassment they need to manage. I need time to think, I finally say, and my voice is steadier than I expected it to be. Angela's response carries the patronizing patience of someone explaining simple concepts to a confused child. There's nothing complicated to think about, Mum. We're handling everything now. You don't need to worry about difficult decisions anymore. As they file out of my hospital room, promising to return tomorrow for my signature on documents I haven't agreed to sign, I close my eyes and feel something I haven't felt in years: clarity. When I open my eyes, Jocelyn is still there, and the expression on her kind face tells me everything I need to know. I'm not imagining the cruelty. I'm not overreacting to their concern. This is really happening, and it's every bit as heartless as it feels. Mrs. Ellison, Jocelyn says quietly, her voice gentle but firm, you don't have to sign anything you don't want to sign. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. For the first time in years, someone is treating me like a person capable of making my own decisions. That night, lying awake in my hospital bed, I make the most important decision of my life. Tomorrow, I won't be just a forgotten matriarch anymore. Tomorrow, I become a woman with a plan. The morning after that horrible hospital scene, I do something I haven't done in 30 years. I lie to my children. When they call asking about those papers, I tell them I'm feeling confused and overwhelmed, that I need more time to recover. Let them think I'm a frail old woman, losing her grip on reality. Sometimes the best strategy is letting your opponents underestimate you completely. What I actually do that morning would shock them to their cores. I call Walter Klein, my attorney for the past 20 years, and schedule an emergency appointment. Not just any appointment. I request a complete estate restructuring meeting, the kind reserved for people with serious wealth to protect. Walter's office is in that converted Victorian house on Main Street, in Montpellier, the same building where I used to take the children for dental appointments when they were small. Funny how places hold such different memories. Back then, I was always worried about having enough money for their cavities. Today, I'm here to protect millions from their greed. Sitting across from Walter in his oak-panelled office, I reveal something my children have no idea about: the full scope of my carefully hidden financial empire. 4 rental properties that I've maintained and improved over the decades, generating monthly income that exceeds what most people make in good years. Investment accounts totaling $1.7 million, built penny by penny from those years of working 3 jobs and living on almost nothing. A life insurance policy worth $2 million that I took out when James died, faithfully paying the premiums for 30 years, while my children assumed I was barely getting by on my teacher's pension. Walter's eyebrows rise as I lay out document after document. He's known me for 2 decades, handled the legal work on my property purchases, but even he didn't realize the full extent of what I'd built. I've been that careful, that quiet about my success. But here's what would truly astound my children. I haven't been hoarding this wealth. I've been using it to help them, anonymously, for years. That mysterious benefactor who helped Angela with her down payment when she was just starting her career, that was me. The lucky business loan that saved Carl's real estate office during the 2008 recession, I arranged that through Walter's connections. The emergency fund that appeared in Lydia's account when her husband's investments went sour 5 years ago. Her mother, who she thinks has nothing. I've been their guardian angel while they've treated me like a burden. I've been their safety net while they've wished I would disappear. The irony would be funny if it weren't so heartbreaking. I want to restructure everything, I tell Walter, and he can hear the steel in my voice that my children have forgotten exists. Every asset, every account, every policy, and I want it done in a way that reveals nothing until after my funeral. Walter has been practicing estate law for 40 years. He recognizes the look in my eyes, because he's seen it before, the quiet fury of a person who has been pushed too far and is ready to push back. But he's never seen it executed with such surgical precision. Over the next 3 hours, Walter and I craft what he later calls a legal masterpiece, a charitable trust that will control the distribution of my assets, with specific requirements that must be met before anyone receives a penny. A mandatory family gathering clause requiring all potential beneficiaries to be present for the will reading. Most importantly, a comprehensive video testimony that I will record and that must be played in full before any assets are revealed. But I don't stop there. I begin reaching out to people my children have forgotten exist, people whose lives I touched during my 43 years as an educator and my decades of community service. Former students who became successful professionals, colleagues who remember my dedication when I was teaching 3 overload courses and working weekends to make ends meet. Community leaders who know about the anonymous donations I've made to the food bank, the scholarships I've funded, the families I've helped during difficult times. What emerges as I make these phone calls is something beautiful and heartbreaking. A network of people who remember Margaret Ellison not as the irrelevant old woman my children see, but as a teacher who changed lives, a neighbor who helped in times of need, a community member who made a difference. These aren't casual acquaintances offering polite condolences. These are people whose lives were genuinely shaped by my influence, and they're shocked to learn how my own children treat me. Sarah Mitchell, who was in my American literature class in 1987 and is now a federal judge, actually starts crying when I tell her about the hospital scene. Mrs. Ellison, she says, "You're the reason I went to law school. You taught me that words have power, that literature isn't just stories but blueprints for justice. How could anyone treat you that way?" Dr. James Hartley, who struggled with dyslexia in my 10th grade English class and is now a pediatric surgeon at Dartmouth-Hitchcock, drives up from New Hampshire just to have coffee with me. "You stayed after school with me for 3 months, he reminds me, until I could read Steinbeck without stumbling over every other word. You saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself." As word quietly spreads through this network that Margaret Ellison could use some company, something wonderful begins to happen. My farmhouse, which has been so quiet and lonely for years, begins to fill with visitors. Not people coming out of pity or obligation, but people coming out of genuine love and respect for the woman I am, not what I can give them. My children, meanwhile, remain completely oblivious to this transformation. They call occasionally, always with the same agenda: when am I going to sign those papers? They've actually started discussing the possibility of pursuing guardianship proceedings if I continue to be unreasonable about my financial affairs. Carl makes the mistake of driving by my house one evening and seeing all the cars in my driveway. When he calls to ask about all the visitors, I simply tell him they're friends from various places. He dismisses this immediately. In his mind, his mother is too old, too irrelevant, too isolated to have real friends. This dismissal reveals everything about how little my children know the woman who raised them. They see only what they want to see, a frail old woman whose life holds no meaning beyond what she might leave them. They can't imagine that I might have built something significant, touched lives in meaningful ways, or commanded respect from people who actually took the time to know me. As weeks pass, I begin making regular trips to a storage facility in Berlin, Vermont, a place my children don't even know exists. Unit 247 contains 30 years' worth of documentation about a life well lived, teaching awards, published poetry, hundreds of thank you letters from former students, photographs from community events, certificates from volunteer organizations, and most importantly, detailed financial records showing exactly how I've used my wealth to help others, including my own ungrateful family. The final step in my preparation is the hardest. I visit my doctor and request a complete psychological evaluation. I want there to be no question about my mental competency when the time comes. Rachel Morrison, who has been my physician for 15 years, conducts a thorough assessment and provides written documentation that Margaret Ellison is of completely sound mind and fully capable of making complex financial and legal decisions. As I sit in my kitchen that evening, signing the last of the legal documents Walter has prepared, I feel something I haven't felt in years, a sense of purpose and power. My children called me useless, irrelevant, a burden to be managed. Tomorrow, they're going to start learning just how wrong they were. Standing in storage unit 247 on a crisp October morning, surrounded by boxes that contain the evidence of my life's work, I experience something I haven't felt in years, genuine pride in myself. Not the quiet satisfaction of duty fulfilled or sacrifice completed, but real pride in the woman I was, the woman I still am, despite what my children have convinced themselves to believe about me. The first box I open contains my teaching career in beautiful detail. 43 years of educating young minds, starting when I was just 22 and fresh out of UVM with big dreams and bigger hopes. These aren't just employment records, they're testimonials to a life of impact that my children never bothered to understand or acknowledge. Letter after letter from former students, some now in their 60s themselves, describing exactly how Mrs. Ellison changed their lives. Marcus Williams, who went on to clerk for the Supreme Court, wrote, "You taught me that thinking critically wasn't just about analyzing literature, it was about analyzing life, justice, and my place in the world." Rebecca Santos, now a best-selling novelist, sent a letter saying, "You were the first person who told me my stories mattered, that my voice was worth hearing. Every book I've published has your influence in it." There's a letter from Thomas Chen, now CEO of a tech company in Burlington. "I was failing everything in 9th grade when you noticed I was trying to work 2 jobs to help my family pay rent. You arranged for me to tutor younger students for pay, which gave me income and showed me I was smart enough to teach others. That changed my whole trajectory." But perhaps the most powerful discovery is my own journal from those hardest years after James died. Reading my own words from 3 decades ago, I'm struck by the strength and determination of the woman who wrote them. This wasn't a victim writing these entries. This was a warrior planning her children's futures with every ounce of energy and intelligence she possessed. One entry, dated March 15, 1994, just weeks after James's funeral, "Sold my wedding ring today to pay for Angela's college application fees. She doesn't know and never will. Some sacrifices are meant to be invisible, but that doesn't make them less real." I look at that bare finger and remember the promises James and I made. I'm keeping those promises the only way I can now, by making sure our children have every opportunity we dreamed of giving them. Another entry from 1997. "Carl's business is failing, but he's too proud to ask for help directly. I've arranged through Walter for an anonymous investors to provide the capital he needs. He'll never know it was me, and that's exactly how it should be." Sometimes loving someone means being invisible so they can see themselves as capable and independent. As I read through years of these entries, a pattern emerges that breaks my heart and fills me with righteous anger simultaneously. Time after time, crisis after crisis, I helped my children through difficulties they didn't even know I was aware of. Anonymous gifts that appeared at exactly the right moments. Mysterious scholarship opportunities. Fortunate coincidences that were actually the result of careful planning by a mother who loved so completely that she made her help invisible to preserve her children's pride and self-respect. The cruelest irony is that I did this because I wanted them to feel strong, capable, and independent. I never wanted them to feel like failures who needed their mother to bail them out. So I became their secret guardian angel, and in doing so, I accidentally convinced them that I had never done anything significant for anyone. In another box, I find something my children have mocked for years, an antique locket that belonged to James's grandmother. They've always dismissed it as worthless old junk cluttering up the house, something they joke about having to deal with when I'm gone. The appraisal document attached to the locket tells a different story entirely. This worthless piece of jewelry is actually a rare Victorian mourning locket worth over $50,000 to collectors. I had it appraised years ago when money was particularly tight after helping Carl through another business crisis, but I couldn't bring myself to sell it because of its sentimental value. This locket becomes a perfect metaphor for how my children see everything in my life. They look at it through the lens of their own limited understanding and dismiss what they can't immediately recognize as valuable. They see an old woman with old things, never bothering to look deeper, ask questions, or consider that their mother might know things they don't. As I continue sorting through my life's documentation, I begin composing letters in my mind, not angry screeds or guilt-inducing manipulations, but honest, clear communications about who I am and what I've accomplished. I want to give my children one final chance to see me truly, to understand the woman they've been dismissing as irrelevant and burdensome. That evening, back in my farmhouse kitchen, I begin writing 3 letters, each one personalized for its recipient. To Angela, I write about ambition without heart, success without soul. I remind her of the girl who used to cry in my arms about feeling different from other kids, who worried that being smart would make her unpopular. When did caring about others become a weakness in your value system? I ask her. When did love become something to be embarrassed by? To Carl, I address the man who built his career on helping families find homes while treating his own mother like a piece of property to be managed. I remind him of the boy who used to bring me flowers from our garden every Mother's Day, who would ask me if I was happy and really listen to my answer. You understood connection once, I write. You understood that relationships matter more than transactions. What happened to that boy who cared about his mother's happiness? To Lydia, perhaps the most painful letter to write. I confront the daughter who has everything she could want, materially, but seems to find joy in nothing. I remind her of the little girl who used to play school with her dolls, pretending to be a teacher just like Mummy, who talked about wanting to help kids learn important things. You had such a beautiful heart once, I write. You wanted to make the world better, not just make yourself look better to people who don't really matter. Each letter ends the same way, an invitation to remember who they used to be, and an expression of hope that they might find their way back to being people I could be proud of, not just people I love, out of biological obligation. As I seal the 3rd letter, my phone rings. The caller ID shows a Boston number I haven't seen in 2 years, but one I recognize immediately. My heart pounds as I answer, and I hear a voice that's older, but unmistakably warm. Maggie? It's Henry. I had the strangest dream about you last night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I should call. Are you all right, sister? Sometimes the universe provides exactly what we need at precisely the moment we need it most. And sometimes the brother you thought you'd lost to time and distance turns out to be exactly the ally you need for the most important battle of your life. The conversation between Henry and me lasts until nearly midnight, 3 hours of 2 old people rediscovering each other and marveling at how much time we'd wasted being too proud to reach out. By the end of it, we're both crying, not from sadness, but from the pure relief of reconnection after so many years of unnecessary silence. What Henry tells me about my children's behavior shocks me more than their hospital performance did. He reveals that he's been following their lives from a distance for years, watching their treatment of me with growing disgust and disbelief. I wanted to intervene, Maggie, he says, his voice tight with suppressed anger. But I knew you were too proud to accept help from anyone, and too loving to let me criticize them directly. I've been waiting 20 years for you to ask for my support. My brother Henry, whom my children believe died years ago, They're thinking of our cousin Henry from Maine, who passed in 2010, is actually very much alive and thriving in Boston. What my children don't know about Uncle Henry would absolutely astound them. After retiring from MIT's engineering department, he built a small fortune consulting for tech companies, then transitioned into philanthropy. He's worth more than all my assets combined, and he's been looking for the right cause to support with his final major charitable contribution. When I explain my situation and the plan I'm developing, Henry doesn't hesitate for even a moment. "I'm in, completely and absolutely," he says, "not just as your brother, but as someone who believes in justice. What they're doing to you isn't just wrong, Maggie, it's morally bankrupt. They need to learn what love actually looks like before it's too late for their own souls." Henry drives up from Boston the following weekend in his quiet luxury sedan, and our reunion is everything I hoped it would be and more. Two elderly siblings, both successful in our own distinct ways, both shaped by hardship and loss, finding our way back to each other in time to face a common challenge. He brings photograph albums I haven't seen in decades, pictures of us as children on the family farm in Peacham, images that remind me who I was before I became just mom to three ungrateful adults. But Henry brings much more than emotional support and cherished memories. He brings legal expertise from his years serving on various charitable boards, financial resources that dwarf my own considerable assets, and something I desperately need: validation from someone who knows my full history and can confirm that I'm not crazy, not difficult, not unreasonable. I'm simply a mother who gave everything and received contempt in return. Together we refine and perfect my estate plan. Henry agrees to serve as executor, a role that will give him legal authority to ensure my wishes are carried out exactly as I intend them to be. But more importantly, he agrees to appear at the will reading as a surprise guest. The uncle my children believed was long dead, someone who will shatter their comfortable assumptions about family dynamics and inheritance expectations. The psychological impact of Henry's resurrection will be devastating for Angela, Carl, and Lydia. They've spent years dismissing my family connections as irrelevant ancient history, believing they were my only legacy and my only hope for the future. Learning that I have a wealthy, influential brother who has been watching their behavior with disgust will destroy their comfortable delusions about their own importance and their exclusive claim on my affections. Henry also brings disturbing news that makes my plan even more satisfying and necessary. Through his network of professional connections in Boston, he's learned troubling things about my children's recent activities. Angela's consulting company is under investigation by the Massachusetts Attorney General's office for discriminatory hiring practices. Carl's real estate firm has been cited multiple times by Vermont's Professional Licensing Board for ethics violations. Lydia's husband's investment portfolio is in serious trouble, and they're facing potential bankruptcy despite their expensive lifestyle. They're not as successful as they pretend to be, Maggie, Henry tells me, spreading out printouts of public records and news articles. And from what I can gather, they're counting on your inheritance to solve financial problems you don't even know about. Their desperation isn't just about greed, it's about genuine need that they're too proud to admit to you directly. This revelation adds another layer of complexity to my understanding of their recent pushy behavior about asset transfers. Their urgency isn't just about convenience or callousness, it's about actual financial desperation. They need my money more than I ever realized, but instead of being honest about their difficulties and asking for help the way loving family members should, they've chosen manipulation, dismissal, and legal coercion. The irony is profound and heartbreaking. If they had come to me honestly, if they had treated me with respect and acknowledged my intelligence and resources, I would have helped them through their crises, just as I've helped them anonymously for decades. But their approach, treating me like a mentally incompetent obstacle to their inheritance, has guaranteed they'll receive nothing but the education they so desperately need about the difference between love and entitlement. Together, Henry and I establish a $500,000 educational endowment in my grandchildren's names, ensuring that he will manage it according to strict criteria designed to reward character development alongside academic achievement. The money will be available for college, graduate school, or starting ethical businesses, but only if the grandchildren maintain certain standards of integrity and demonstrate genuine care for others less fortunate. This endowment serves multiple strategic purposes. It rewards the next generation for their own achievements rather than their parents' manipulative behavior. It establishes Henry as a legitimate family member with legal standing and financial resources. And it demonstrates clearly that my wealth is real and substantial, not the fantasy my children have convinced themselves I'm living in to make themselves feel better about their neglect. The children's behavior becomes increasingly desperate as weeks pass. Lydia shows up unexpectedly one afternoon, ostensibly to check on me, but clearly hoping to search the house for evidence of assets or important documents. What she finds instead is a house that looks almost empty, with many of my most valuable possessions mysteriously missing. What Lydia doesn't realize is that I've been systematically removing items of real value, not because I'm preparing for a nursing home as she hopes, but because I'm protecting my belongings from being stolen or borrowed by family members who have started to feel entitled to my possessions while I'm still alive. The confrontation between Lydia and me that afternoon reveals just how far our relationship has deteriorated, and how completely she misunderstands both my intelligence and my resources. She doesn't ask about my health, my happiness, or my feelings. Instead, she demands to know where things have gone, and why the house looks different. "Are you hiding things from us, Mom?" she asks, with an accusatory tone that would be shocking coming from a stranger, let alone from a daughter speaking to her mother. My response is calm but pointed. I'm protecting my belongings from people who might take them without asking permission. The meaning is crystal clear, and Lydia's reaction confirms everything I suspected about her intentions. Instead of being horrified by the implication that she might steal from her own mother, she becomes defensive and angry, as if she's been caught in the act rather than confronted with an unfair accusation. That evening, after Lydia leaves in an indignant huff, I sit down to write what I know will be my final journal entry as a secret keeper and hidden strategist. Tomorrow, certain truths will begin coming to light, starting with Henry's first public appearance in my life in over 20 years. The entry I write is simple, but carries the weight of 30 years of invisible sacrifice and growing disappointment. My children called me useless, irrelevant, and burdensome. Tomorrow they begin to learn exactly how wrong they were about everything that matters. I passed away peacefully in my sleep on a Tuesday night in November, exactly 3 weeks after Henry and I finalized all the legal arrangements. Jocelyn found me the next morning, lying in my own bed with a peaceful expression that she later told people made me look 20 years younger, as if some great weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. I suppose in a way it had been. For the first time in 30 years, I was free from the burden of loving people who couldn't love me back properly, free from the exhaustion of being invisible to the very people I had sacrificed everything to support. In those final weeks, surrounded by former students and community members who genuinely valued my life and contributions, I had remembered what it felt like to matter to someone. The irony of my death is both heartbreaking and perfectly appropriate. After years of feeling invisible to my own children, I died quietly, without drama or demands for attention, exactly as I had lived. Even in death, I maintained the dignity and grace that had defined my life, while my children immediately proved they had learnt nothing about dignity from the woman who raised them. Within hours of receiving Jocelyn's phone call, Angela, Carl, and Lydia converged on Vermont once again, but their behavior in the face of their mother's death revealed everything about their true priorities and character. Instead of grieving, they were calculating. Instead of sharing fond memories, they were mentally dividing potential assets. Instead of honoring the woman who had given them life and opportunities, they were already planning how to liquidate my estate as quickly and efficiently as possible. Angela immediately took charge of funeral arrangements, but only because she wanted to control costs and presentation. Something simple and economical. She instructed Bob Morrison at the Stowe Funeral Home. She was a simple woman who lived a simple life. Nothing elaborate or expensive. The condescension in her voice, as she reduced my life to simple, made Bob visibly uncomfortable, but he'd seen this before, adult children more interested in saving money than celebrating a life. Carl spent his time walking through my farmhouse with a real estate appraiser he'd brought from Waterbury, discussing property values and market conditions, while neighbours still stopped by to pay their respects. He talked about my death as a transition of assets, rather than the loss of a human being, his excitement about the land values, barely concealed even in the presence of people who had come to honour my memory. Lydia focused her energy on sorting through my personal belongings, clearly searching for anything valuable that might have been overlooked in previous visits. She grew increasingly frustrated by how little she found of obvious worth, not realizing that everything truly valuable had already been carefully relocated according to my detailed instructions to Henry and Walter Klein. But while my children treated my death as a business opportunity to be optimized, something extraordinary happened in the community I had served for so many decades. Word spread quickly through the network of people whose lives I had touched, and the response was immediate, overwhelming, and beautiful. Former students began calling the funeral home from across New England, requesting time off from their jobs as doctors, lawyers, teachers, and business owners to attend the funeral of the woman who had changed their lives. Colleagues from my 4 decades in education made arrangements to honor someone they considered a mentor and inspiration. Community members I had helped anonymously over the years came forward with stories my children had never heard, revealing a depth of connection and impact that stunned everyone except those who had truly known me. The funeral itself became a study in contrasts, so stark it would have been comical if it weren't so tragic. While Angela delivered a brief, generic eulogy that could have been written about any elderly person, she was a devoted mother and longtime community member who will be missed. The small Stowe community church, filled with people who had specific, powerful, deeply personal stories about Margaret Ellison's impact on their lives. Federal Judge Sarah Mitchell stood up during the service to speak about how Mrs. Ellison had stayed after school every day for an entire semester to help her overcome a severe stutter that was destroying her confidence. She didn't just teach me to speak clearly, Judge Mitchell told the packed church. She taught me that my voice mattered, that what I had to say was worth hearing. Every ruling I've written from the bench carries her influence. Dr. Rebecca Chen, the best-selling author, read a poem inspired by my creative writing class from 30 years earlier, her voice breaking as she explained how I had been the first adult to tell her that her stories had value and that her Asian American perspective was something the world needed to hear. Thomas Moreau, now a successful small business owner, tearfully described how an anonymous scholarship, which everyone now realized had come from me, allowed him to become the first person in his family to graduate from college, breaking a generational cycle of poverty and limited opportunities. My children sat in the front row, looking increasingly uncomfortable, as story after story revealed a woman they had clearly never bothered to know. These weren't generic memories about a sweet old lady. These were specific testimonials about a woman who had used her intelligence, resources, and compassion to change lives systematically and significantly over decades of quiet service. Carl whispered to his wife during the service, loud enough that several people heard him, "Where did all these people come from?" I had no idea she knew this many people, or had this kind of impact. Linda's response was quiet, but cutting enough to make heads turn. "Maybe you should have asked her about her life instead of just waiting for her to die." After the service, as people filed past the family to offer condolences, a pattern emerged that clearly shook my children's assumptions about my life and legacy. Person after person mentioned specific ways I had helped them, supported them, or influenced their development. Many spoke of mysterious gifts or opportunities that had appeared at crucial moments in their lives, gifts they now realized had come from the woman they were saying goodbye to. Angela became increasingly agitated as she began to understand the scope of my community involvement and financial generosity. How much money did she give away over the years? She asked Carl in what she thought was a whisper, but carried farther than she intended. Several people heard this question, and the looks they gave. Angela made it painfully clear that they understood exactly what kind of daughter they were dealing with. The contrast between my lifetime of generosity and my children's immediate focus on money couldn't have been more obvious or more damning. As the funeral reception wound down, my children gathered in a corner of the church basement, making plans for estate settlement and discussing timelines for property sales and asset liquidation. They were absorbed in their financial calculations when their conversation was interrupted by a voice they didn't recognize, but that carried unmistakable authority. "Excuse me," said Walter Klein, my attorney for 20 years, "but we need to discuss the will reading. It's been scheduled for next Tuesday at 10 o'clock. Are all the beneficiaries present?" Angela looked around with the dismissive confidence of someone who had never doubted her assumptions. "We're all here, obviously. Who else would there be?" Walter's smile was professional but somehow unsettling, carrying knowledge that would soon shatter their certainty about everything they thought they knew. Well, actually, there are quite a few beneficiaries listed in your mother's will. We'll need everyone present for the formal reading. My children exchanged glances of confusion and growing concern. Beneficiaries. They had assumed everything would come to them automatically, divided equally among the 3 surviving children. The possibility that I might have left money to others, to strangers, to causes they didn't approve of, was both shocking and infuriating, in a way that revealed everything about their sense of entitlement to wealth they had never earned. If I could have seen the will reading that Tuesday morning, I think I would have laughed and cried at the same time. According to what Jocelyn told me later, when she visited my grave, the scene was everything I had hoped it would be, and more. The conference room at Klein and Associates was packed beyond capacity, filled not just with my children, but with dozens of people they recognized from the funeral, former students, colleagues, community members, and faces they couldn't place, but who obviously had deep connections to the woman they were only now beginning to understand. At the head of the long oak table sat Walter Klein, looking more formal and authoritative than my children remembered. But the real shock came when they noticed the distinguished elderly gentleman sitting beside him, someone who looked completely comfortable in this legal setting, despite being a complete stranger to them. Before we begin, Walter announced to the room, "I'd like to introduce Henry Ellison, Margaret's brother and the executor of her estate." The silence that followed was so complete, you could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Angela's face went white as flour. Carl's mouth fell open like he was trying to catch flies. Lydia actually half rose from her chair, as if she was going to bolt from the room, then sat back down heavily when she realized everyone was staring at her. "That's impossible," Angela finally managed to say, her voice shaking like a leaf in a Vermont windstorm. "Uncle Henry died years ago. We went to his funeral." Henry's smile was gentle, but carried the authority of someone who had spent decades in academic and business settings where precision mattered. "I think you're confusing me with our cousin Henry from Maine, who passed away in 2010. I've been very much alive in Boston, building a charitable foundation and watching my sister's children from a respectful distance. Margaret and I reconnected recently, and she asked me to ensure her final wishes were carried out exactly as she intended them to be." The psychological impact of this revelation hit my children like a physical blow. Not only was their uncle alive, but he was clearly successful, well-educated, and legally positioned to challenge anything they might want to dispute about my will. Suddenly, they weren't the only family members in the room, and they definitely weren't the most important or influential ones. Walter opened the will with a formality that made it immediately clear this wasn't going to be a simple reading of assets and distribution. "Margaret Ellison was a woman of substantial means and considerable wisdom," he began, his voice carrying through the packed room. "Her estate includes 4 rental properties, valued at approximately $2.2 million, investment accounts totaling $1.7 million, and a life insurance policy worth $2 million. The collective gasp from my children was audible throughout the room. Nearly $6 million. Their mother, whom they had convinced themselves was barely scraping by on a teacher's pension and Social Security, was actually wealthier than all of them combined. The woman they had pitied for her circumstances had been more financially successful than any of them could dream of being. But the shock was just beginning. As Walter continued reading, it became devastatingly clear that my children were receiving nothing directly from this substantial estate. Instead, I had left specific bequests to dozens of people in that room, each gift accompanied by a personal note explaining exactly why that person had mattered to me and earned my respect and gratitude. $200,000 to the scholarship fund at Stowe High School, designated specifically for students from single-parent families who demonstrated both academic potential and strong character. $150,000 to the local food bank, which I had supported anonymously for over 2 decades. $100,000 divided among former students who had become teachers themselves, continuing my educational legacy and values. When Walter announced that Jocelyn would inherit my farmhouse and the surrounding 43 acres, worth over $800,000, the room erupted in spontaneous applause. Everyone except my children understood that this gift went to someone who had shown genuine care and respect for me in my final years, someone who had treated me like a valued human being rather than an inconvenience to be managed. Angela finally found her voice, but what came out was a shriek that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. This isn't legal. She wasn't mentally competent to make these decisions. We have documentation of her confusion and inability to handle complex financial matters. Henry stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and dignified, and produced a thick folder of documents. Are you referring to the comprehensive psychological evaluation she underwent at my request 3 months ago? The one conducted by Dr. Rachel Morrison and reviewed by 2 independent specialists, all of whom confirmed that Margaret was of completely sound mind and specifically capable of making complex financial decisions. He opened the folder and continued, or perhaps you're thinking of the recording she made of your conversation in the hospital, where you spoke about her as if she were already mentally incapacitated while she was lying right there, listening to every cruel word. Carl tried to storm out of the room, but Henry's voice stopped him mid-stride. Carl, you might want to stay. There's still the matter of the video testimony your mother prepared specifically for the 3 of you. The mention of a video testimony sent visible chills through all 3 of my children. What had I recorded? What did I know about their private conversations and true feelings? And how much of their real behavior was about to be exposed to a room full of people who had genuinely loved and respected me? As Walter set up the video equipment, the tension in the room became so thick you could cut it with a knife. The other beneficiaries, people who had truly known and appreciated me, watched with curiosity and growing understanding. They were beginning to realize they were witnessing something extraordinary, the final lesson of a master teacher who had saved her most important instruction for last. Lydia made one desperate attempt to maintain some dignity. Whatever she says in that video, you have to understand that she was hurt and confused by her illness. We were trying to help her, to take care of her financial affairs, because she was overwhelmed by the complexity of it all. Her words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to become an inferno, because everyone in that room who had actually known me understood exactly what was coming next. They knew it was going to completely destroy every assumption my children had made about my mental state, my capabilities, and my understanding of their true motivations. Henry looked at each of my children with an expression that mixed pity and contempt in equal measures. Your mother wasn't confused, overwhelmed, or incompetent in any way. She was heartbroken, and she was determined to make absolutely sure you understood exactly what you had thrown away when you threw away your relationship with the most remarkable woman any of you will ever have the privilege of knowing. As the video screen flickered to life, showing me sitting in my favorite armchair at the farmhouse, looking directly into the camera with the clear, intelligent eyes of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing and why she was doing it, the room fell completely silent. What came next would be the most devastating and educational 20 minutes of my children's lives, because I was about to teach them the most important lesson they would ever receive about the difference between love and entitlement, between having a parent and deserving one. Looking back now from wherever I am, I'm proud of that video testimony. I had taken great care with my appearance that day. Wearing the blue dress James always said brought out my eyes, sitting in the chair where I had read bedtime stories to my children when they still thought I was magical. I wanted to look like the woman I truly was, not the decrepit burden they had convinced themselves I had become. To my children Angela, Carl and Lydia, I began, looking directly into the camera with the steady gaze of someone who had spent 43 years commanding classroom attention, and to all the wonderful people gathered for this reading who truly knew and valued me. I want to tell you a story about love, sacrifice, and what it really means to matter in this world. I reached for the journal I had kept during those hardest years after James died, the one that contained the raw truth about what our family's survival had actually cost. My voice remained steady and clear as I began reading entries that revealed the depth of my sacrifice and the breadth of my strength during the years my children remembered simply as getting by. December 15th, 1994. I read aloud. Angela called today, sobbing because she can't make her rent payment and her boyfriend left her with bills she can't handle alone. She doesn't know I haven't bought groceries in over a week because I sent her my emergency fund last month when she said she was desperate. I told her I'd wire money today, and I will. The electric company can wait another month for payment. From what Jocelyn later told me, Angela's face completely crumbled as she heard these words. She was remembering that desperate phone call, but only now was she learning that her mother had gone without electricity, so her daughter could keep her Boston apartment during what was really just a temporary crisis caused by overspending on clothes and restaurant meals. I continued reading, turning pages that documented years of invisible sacrifice. March 8, 1996. Carl's real estate business is failing, and he's too proud to ask for help directly. I can see the stress in Linda's face when they think no one is watching. I've arranged through Walter Klein for Mr. Patterson at the bank to offer what appears to be a special small business loan program. Carl will never know the money came from my retirement savings, and that's exactly as it should be. Carl's hands were shaking as he realized that the lucky break that had saved his career wasn't luck at all. It was his mother depleting her own financial security so her son could achieve his dreams without feeling like a failure who needed to be rescued by his widowed mother. I turned to another entry, dated just before Lydia's wedding, June 12, 1998. Lydia wants her wedding to be perfect, and I want that for her too. She doesn't know I've been cleaning the Henderson mansion every Saturday for 8 months to pay for her photographer and floral arrangements. She told her friends I couldn't contribute much because teachers don't make real money. I smiled and agreed. Sometimes loving someone means letting them think less of you so they can think better of themselves. According to Henry's later account, Lydia began crying at this point, ugly, desperate tears that smeared her expensive makeup. She was remembering how she had complained to her wealthy friends about having a poor mother who couldn't help with wedding expenses the way other parents could, never knowing that her mother was working an extra job every weekend to make her dreams come true. But I wasn't finished. I set down the journal and looked directly into the camera again, my voice taking on the tone I had once used when teaching students who weren't living up to their potential. I want you to understand something crucial, I said. I didn't make these sacrifices because I was weak or because I had no choice. I made them because I chose to, because I believed my children were worth any price I might have to pay for their happiness and success. I believed you were good people who would grow into adults I could be proud of, not just people I loved out of biological obligation. My voice hardened slightly as I continued. But love is not the same as enabling. Sacrifice is not the same as surrender. And being a mother does not mean accepting disrespect, manipulation, and cruelty from people who should honor the woman who gave them life and opportunities. I reached for a folder and began holding up photographs and documents to the camera, one by one. Pictures of the rental properties I owned, awards I had won for teaching excellence, newspaper clippings about scholarship programs I had funded anonymously, bank statements showing charitable contributions made in my children's names without their knowledge. You called me useless, I said, displaying a photo of the Cottage Street property that generated more monthly income than Carl earned in most months. You said I had no legacy worth mentioning, I continued, showing a Burlington Free Press article about an anonymous donor who had funded a literacy program for adult learners. You treated me like a burden you were eager to be free from, I added, revealing documentation of the $500,000 I had quietly contributed to various charities over the past 2 decades. The people in that room who weren't my children, the former students, colleagues, and community members, were leaning forward in fascination, captivated by this revelation of a woman who had essentially been living as a secret philanthropist, someone who had used her wealth to improve lives while living modestly herself. But it was my next words that delivered the crushing emotional blow my children would never recover from. I want you to know that I heard every cruel comment, noticed every missed birthday, felt every moment when you made it clear that your lives were too important and too busy to include your mother. And I want you to know that it broke my heart every single time. The raw pain in my voice filled that room with uncomfortable silence. This wasn't an angry rant or a guilt-inducing manipulation. This was the honest testimony of a woman who had loved completely and been rejected systematically by the people who should have treasured her most. Carl, I said, looking directly into the camera, as if I could see him, when you told your wife that you were waiting for me to die so you could develop my land, I was standing in my kitchen doorway, listening to every word. When Angela told her assistant that I was an embarrassing burden who had never accomplished anything meaningful, those words reached me through people who cared enough to warn me what my own daughter was saying about me behind my back. When Lydia told her book club that she wished she had a mother worth bragging about, instead of just someone to be managed, that cut deeper than you could ever imagine. Each revelation hit like a physical slap. The conversations they thought were private, the cruel comments they assumed I would never hear, the dismissive jokes at my expense. I had known about all of it, remembered all of it, carried the pain of all of it. I ended the video with one final devastating message. I'm not doing this for revenge. Revenge is petty and accomplishes nothing lasting. I'm doing this for education. You need to learn what love actually looks like, what sacrifice actually means, and what you lost when you decided I wasn't worth your time, respect, or basic human kindness. Maybe someday you'll understand that the woman you dismissed as irrelevant was actually the best thing that ever happened to you. The screen went dark after I delivered my final words. You mistook quiet for worthless. You mistook kindness for weakness. You mistook my love for your entitlement. I hope someday you realize your mistake, but I won't be here to see whether you learn anything from this lesson or not. As the video ended, the only sounds in that packed conference room were Angela's broken sobs, Carl's labored breathing, and Lydia's whispered, "Oh my God, what have we done?" But their education was far from over, because the community was about to show them exactly what their mother had meant to people who had bothered to truly know her. What emerged from Rebecca's research was exactly what I had hoped people would eventually understand, a portrait of a woman who had essentially been Vermont's secret philanthropist. Someone who had used her carefully accumulated wealth to change lives while living so modestly that her own children assumed she was struggling financially. Rebecca interviewed dozens of former students, tracked down recipients of anonymous scholarships and gifts, and documented charitable contributions that totaled over $600,000 during my lifetime. The Burlington Free Press ran a front-page story that Friday with a headline that made my heart sing, even from whatever realm I now inhabited. The Quiet Millionaire of Vermont, a teacher's hidden legacy of love and sacrifice. The article was written by Rebecca Santos, one of my former students who had become a respected journalist, and it didn't just cover the will reading, it investigated and revealed the full scope of what I had accomplished during my lifetime. Within 48 hours of that will reading, my story was spreading through Vermont like wildfire during a dry summer, and then far beyond our little state's borders. Someone in that room had recorded portions of my video testimony on their phone, and by Thursday morning, clips were circulating on social media with captions like "Teacher's final lesson to ungrateful children," and "This will make you call your mother right now." But while the broader community rallied around my memory and the lessons my story contained, my children faced a very different and much harsher reality. Their behavior at the will reading had been witnessed by dozens of people, and word spread quickly through their professional and social circles about how they had treated the mother who had sacrificed everything for their success. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Free Press received hundreds of calls and emails from people sharing their own stories about elderly parents they now realized they may have undervalued. Social media filled with people posting pictures of their grandparents and great-grandparents, suddenly wondering what stories and sacrifices they had never bothered to learn about. The story resonated far beyond Vermont's borders, touching a universal nerve about how we treat our aging parents and what we might be taking for granted in the people closest to us. The newspaper's website crashed from traffic as the story was shared thousands of times across social media platforms. Television news programs picked up the story, radio hosts discussed it, and newspapers from Boston to Seattle ran their own versions. Angela's consulting firm began receiving complaints from clients who questioned whether they wanted to work with someone who had shown such callous disregard for her own family. Several major contracts were suddenly reconsidered, and she found herself facing professional consequences she had never anticipated. Her reputation for strategic thinking became a liability when people wondered what kind of strategy involved, dismissing the woman who had funded her entire education and early career. Lydia found herself gradually excluded from the social circles that had defined her identity for years. Her wealthy friends, many of whom had elderly parents of their own, were horrified by what they learned about her treatment of me. Invitations stopped coming, charitable board positions were quietly withdrawn, and she discovered that in small communities like ours, reputation matters more than money when it comes to social acceptance. Carl's real estate business suffered immediate and dramatic consequences. Potential clients began asking uncomfortable questions about his character and values, wondering how someone who couldn't recognize his own mother's worth could be trusted to assess property values for others. His professional licensing came under review when several clients filed complaints questioning his ethical standards. The Vermont Association of Realtors quietly began an investigation into whether someone who had tried to manipulate an elderly parent into signing over assets was fit to handle other families' most important financial decisions. But perhaps the most devastating response came from the next generation, my grandchildren, who were old enough to understand what had happened and mortified by their parents' behavior. Carl's daughter Emma, a college sophomore at UVM, made a decision that stunned her entire family. She changed her major from business to education and published a heartfelt social media post that went viral. Emma's decision to study education as a tribute to my memory became a symbol of hope that some family legacies can skip a generation, that wisdom and values can survive even when they seem to have been rejected by the people who should have treasured them most. Her post was shared over 50,000 times, with comments from people who saw in her words the possibility of redemption and growth. Grandma Maggie was the only adult who ever really listened to my dreams without trying to change them into something more practical. Emma wrote, alongside a picture of us from her high school graduation 2 years earlier. She used to send me books and articles about things I was passionate about, and she was the only person who asked about my ideas instead of just my grades. I'm ashamed that I didn't visit her more often, and I'm devastated by how my parents treated the most generous, intelligent, caring woman I've ever known, but I can still honor what she stood for. The foundation's launch event, held in my former home 6 months after my death, drew hundreds of people. Former students who had become successful professionals pledged significant contributions. Community members shared stories about anonymous help they had received, and only now understood had come from me. Local businesses offered ongoing support for programs that would carry forward my values and priorities. But perhaps the most powerful moment came when Angela's former assistant, Maria Rodriguez, spoke at the foundation launch. Maria revealed that Angela had regularly made cruel jokes about her pathetic old mother, who never accomplished anything, jokes that had made Maria deeply uncomfortable because her own grandmother had been her greatest source of wisdom and strength. Meanwhile, Jocelyn made an announcement that surprised everyone except those who had truly known me. She was converting my farmhouse into the headquarters for a new foundation dedicated to supporting single parents, pursuing education, and elderly people who needed advocates to prevent family exploitation. The Margaret Ellison Foundation would continue the work I had been doing quietly for decades, helping people who needed assistance but were too proud to ask for it directly. I always wondered about Mrs. Ellison, Maria told the crowd. Angela described her as this sad, irrelevant woman, but every time her mother was mentioned, I thought about my abuela, who cleaned offices her whole life, but was the wisest person I ever knew. I wish I had trusted my instincts and reached out to Mrs. Ellison directly. I have a feeling we would have understood each other perfectly. As months passed, the ripple effects of my story continued spreading. Support groups formed for adult children who realized they might be neglecting elderly parents. Nursing homes reported increased visits from family members who had been inspired to reconnect with relatives they had been taking for granted. Financial planning seminars began, including discussions about how to recognize and prevent elder financial abuse within families. This public testimony added another devastating layer to Angela's professional reputation crisis. Her own former employee was publicly contradicting her character assessment, and Maria's story about Angela's workplace cruelty made it clear that the dismissive attitude toward me hadn't been confined to private family matters. It had been part of Angela's public persona, something she had been comfortable sharing with colleagues and subordinates. 3 months after the will reading, Angela received a certified letter that would be the final surprise in a year full of devastating revelations. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a letter I had written before my death, and asked Walter Klein to deliver only if my children showed no signs of genuine remorse or change following the will reading. The letter was addressed simply to my daughter and contained just a few lines that would haunt Angela for the rest of her life. Angela, you were the first baby I held, the first child I taught to read, the first person who ever called me Mama. I loved you completely from the moment you existed, and I never stopped loving you even when you made it clear that love was not returned. I hope someday you remember how to love yourself enough to become someone worthy of the love that was always available to you. It was signed simply your mother, and at the bottom in different ink, added later in my handwriting, P.S. Your real inheritance was always the opportunity to choose who you wanted to be. I hope you choose better than you have so far. 1 year after my death, if I could have seen Angela sitting in her car outside Mount Pleasant Cemetery in Stowe, holding my final letter with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since she'd read it for the first time 6 months earlier, I think my heart would have broken and healed simultaneously. She had driven to my grave 4 times in the past month, but each time she'd turned around without getting out of the car, unable to face the reality of standing at the resting place of the mother she had finally begun to understand. But today was different. Today Angela had finally found the courage to confront what she had lost and what she had thrown away through years of callous disregard for the woman who had sacrificed everything for her children's success and happiness. My final letter had accomplished what all my years of patient love had failed to do. It had broken through her corporate armor and forced her to see herself as I had seen her. A frightened little girl who had built walls so high she couldn't see the love that had always been available to her. As she walked toward my grave, Angela noticed she wasn't alone. Henry was sitting on the bench he had installed near my headstone 6 months earlier, and he looked up as she approached. His expression was neither welcoming nor hostile, simply patient, the way I had tried to be with my children for so many years. "I didn't expect anyone else to be here," Angela said quietly, her voice carrying none of the corporate confidence that had once defined her interactions with family. "I come every Sunday," Henry replied gently. "Your mother and I lost 30 years to pride and distance. I figure spending an hour with her each week is the very least I can do now." Angela looked at my headstone for the first time, expecting to see a generic inscription chosen by the funeral director. Instead, she read words that stopped her breathing. Margaret Ellison, beloved teacher, silent philanthropist, invisible hero. She mattered, quietly. "The community insisted on paying for the headstone," Henry explained, following her gaze. "They wanted everyone who visits to understand exactly what kind of woman is buried here, the kind of impact a life can have when it's lived with genuine love and service to others." For the first time since receiving my final letter, Angela spoke honestly about the weight she was carrying. "I don't know how to live with what I've done to her, to us. I don't know how to forgive myself for being so blind, so cruel, so completely wrong about everything that actually mattered." Henry's response was gentle but direct, carrying the wisdom of someone who had also learned hard lessons about family and time. "You can't change what happened, but you can choose what happens next. Your mother's last words about you were that she hoped you would learn to become someone worthy of the love that was always available to you." Angela sank onto the bench beside her uncle, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of her loss. She wasn't just grieving my death, she was grieving the relationship we could have had, the woman she could have known, the daughter she could have been, if she hadn't been so determined to see me as irrelevant and burdensome. As they sat together in the Vermont autumn air, other visitors arrived at the cemetery, each carrying flowers or small tokens to leave at my grave. Emma, Carl's daughter, approached with a book of poetry she wanted to share with her grandmother. A woman in her 50s introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Williams, a former student who stopped by every month to leave a poem or an article about educational innovations she thought I would have appreciated. An elderly couple explained that they were there because Mrs. Ellison had anonymously paid for their grandson's cancer treatments when he was 7 years old. Watching these strangers honor my memory, Angela experienced a profound realization. I had never been the irrelevant, forgotten woman she and her siblings had convinced themselves I was. I had been the center of a vast network of love, respect, and gratitude that extended far beyond biological family relationships. While my children had been dismissing me as worthless, dozens of other people had been treasuring the impact I'd had on their lives. Over the following months, each of my children responded differently to the education they had received. Carl essentially vanished from public life, selling his failing real estate business and retreating to a small cabin in the mountains of northern Vermont, where he spent his days reading philosophy and writing long letters to me that would never be sent. His marriage to Linda survived, but barely, and only because she insisted he seek counseling to deal with the guilt and shame that were consuming him. Lydia entered intensive therapy and began volunteering at the Shelburne nursing home, spending hours each week listening to elderly residents tell their stories and share their wisdom. It was slow, painful work for someone who had spent years avoiding anything that reminded her of aging or mortality, but it was also healing work that gradually taught her to see past the surface of things and recognize the value in lives that society often dismisses as no longer relevant. But Angela's transformation was the most dramatic and, I hoped, the most lasting. She took early retirement from her consulting firm, partly because her reputation had been severely damaged, but mostly because she had lost all interest in the kind of strategic manipulation that had once defined her professional success. She applied to become a substitute teacher in the Vermont public school system, wanting to honor my profession and perhaps begin to understand what had driven my passion for education. It was humbling work for someone who had once considered teaching beneath her ambitions and intelligence, but it was also revelatory work that showed her what I had tried to tell her for years, that shaping young minds and touching lives was the most important work anyone could do, regardless of the salary or social status it provided. On the first anniversary of my death, Angela stood once again at my grave, but this time she wasn't alone with her guilt and regret. Emma was with her, along with several of my other grandchildren who had chosen to honor my values rather than inherit their parents' mistakes. They had installed a small garden around my headstone, planted with the same herbs and flowers I had grown in my farmhouse garden for so many years. As Angela read aloud from one of my published poems she had never known existed until after my death, a stranger approached the grave. An elderly woman, walking slowly but with purpose, carried a small bouquet of flowers and a worn photograph. "Excuse me," the woman said softly. "Are you Margaret's daughter?" Angela nodded, bracing herself for another story about my generosity that would make her feel worse about her past behavior. But the woman's words surprised her. "I wanted to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" The elderly woman smiled through tears that reflected years of gratitude. "For raising such a wonderful mother. My grandson was in Mrs. Ellison's class 30 years ago, and she saved his life. Not dramatically, but quietly, the way she did everything. She noticed that he was struggling at home, made sure he had safe places to study and food when he was hungry, and most importantly, she believed in his potential when no one else did. He became a pediatric surgeon because of her influence and encouragement." The woman placed her flowers on my grave and continued, "I know you and your mother had your difficulties, and I understand that family relationships can be complicated in ways outsiders don't see, but I want you to know that she raised you to be capable of love, kindness, and service to others. Those qualities are your real inheritance from her. Whether you choose to claim that inheritance and use those gifts is entirely up to you." As the woman walked away, Angela finally understood the message I had been trying to leave her through everything: the will, the video, the letters, even this final encounter. Love isn't about being perfect or never making mistakes. Love is about choosing to grow, to change, to become worthy of the love that was always available. It's about recognizing that quiet doesn't mean worthless, that kindness isn't weakness, and that the people who matter quietly might actually matter most of all. The story of Margaret Ellison ends where it began, with a quiet woman whose impact extended far beyond what anyone could see on the surface. But now, finally, some of the people who should have recognized my worth while I was alive are learning to see clearly, learning to love deeply, and learning that it's never too late to honor the people who mattered quietly all along. In the end, I suppose that's all any of us can hope for, that our love leaves echoes, that our sacrifices bear fruit, and that someone somewhere learns to choose love over selfishness because of the example we tried to set. I mattered, quietly, and sometimes that's enough.